All right, the term heavy metal was used by William S. Burroughs in the book The Naked Lunch, which is also a movie directed by David Cronenberg, if you want to check that out. It basically blossomed into the Steppenwolf song Born to Be Wild, and where he used heavy metal thunder. Cream magazine would critique rock music, and it's no longer existent. Lester Begg referred to the term heavy metal for bands like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath. So heavy metal, pretty much in its origins, blossomed around 72, 73, and then you get the term magazine, I think came out in like 77, heavy metal comic book magazine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was aware of heavy metal, the comic book magazine. Like, I was aware of that growing up. I never had a copy of it. I never had an issue or anything like that I could really like page through. But I was aware of it, and I heard people relate it to kind of Tales from the Crypt, except it was like a fantasy version where everything was hyper stylized.
Yep.
And rock and roll.
Salacious, erotic, sci-fi fantasy, and how it got skipped over from the comic book code is it wasn't a comic book. It was a magazine, just like other magazines that are exploitative and everything. So the accountants regard it as a magazine, not a comic book, even though it is just a collection of comic books.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to talk about the adaptation to film produced by Ivan Reitman today, Heavy Metal from 1981. Today on Kyle and Nick on Film. Join us. Welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from Goethe from Reviews.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, and of course I'm going to tell you what you already know. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your girlfriends and boyfriends about the show. If you want to reach out to us, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. You can follow us there as well. You can also reach out, but comment down below. We also got some great deals for Patreon, so you can join that and tell us what to do. Today we're going to talk about one of the full-feature animation cult classics. Of course, the magazine was such a success that they had the money to finance to do their own animation film. We're going to talk about heavy metal.
Yes, absolutely. And the film is kind of a loose narrative about the Lochnar, a mysterious and glowing green orb that tortures a little girl with unusual and terrifying tales of fantasy horror. This sphere, which claims to be the ultimate evil, has pushed its influence across time and space throughout worlds and lands unseen in this rock and roll anthology.
So, yeah, today we're going to talk about a film that followed the green bouncing ball.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like a cousin to American Pop in some ways, where it's got that, like, adult, musically driven story with completely different plots.
Yeah. And I have to say, the stories in heavy metal are very soft compared to what's in the magazine. Yes. Even though this is kind of harsh animation, it's still kind of not really going to where the magazine always goes to.
So, and Nick, did you see this film around the 80s time, or was it later?
Late 80s, and then by that time the style has kind of gone away, because I regard this as, even though it came out in 81, this is kind of very late 70s.
Yeah, I mean, I think the utilization of the music and stuff in there, the music feels like of the 70s more.
A little like 78, 79, even though it came out in 81. So it's a little bit, in about 88, 89, it's already old. It's sort of old-fashioned animation.
Yeah, when as you mentioned in the opening, I became aware of the magazine first, and kind of just it was in my brain, but then it kind of left, and I didn't think about it. And it wasn't actually until the season 12 episode of South Park titled Major Boobage, which is about all the kids getting high on cat urine, I think, and they dreamed heavy metal. That was made me go what is this movie that they're talking about? I gotta go hunt this thing down, and that's when I found a copy of Heavy Metal and became completely engrossed in it. So.
I swear to God, the first origin story that takes place is the catalyst for Fifth Element.
No, they basically said that.
Oh, really?
We can't legally say that we based it off Heavy Metal, but I think that was known was that the world of Heavy Metal and Blade Runner combined made what we have with the Fifth Element. So
I swear to when I watched Fifth Element, it's like, oh my God, this is the beginning of Heavy Metal, the cartoon, and then blossomed into. It's fine. Let's go this.
And I think they even said I think that was kind of the idea, was that it would be set in the same world as that piece, which was the Harry Canyon piece, and Harry Canyon's very much like Bruce Willis's character anyway. You know, I mean, he's very much like the same guy, but just maybe a little bit more hair. You know,
so if you like Fifth Element, you might play the first 10 minutes of this film. Bouncing the ball carries over. One of the voiceover actors is an unknown person. John Candy does two characters. There's a talking robot, and has multiple jobs, but he plays this protagonist, muscle-bound protagonist as well.
I think John Candy gets laid in this movie more than any other film he worked on.
Well, he's more fit.
Yeah, so Dan and then the robot. I really liked the John Candy voice work for Den. It's weird when you think to yourself that he was going to play the young boy and then this really rippling, tough, sweaty man character of Den. It's not, I mean, no offense to John Candy, it just wasn't his visual style that he had.
No.
So I'm surprised at how well it works when he plays this kind of, and when he plays him as kind of trying to be tougher too, and he like strengthens his voice a little bit, it works really well. And I would not have been the person to cast John Candy in that role, but I think he makes a pretty darn good superhero.
Another one of the famous voiceovers is Harold Ramis, and the Dean from Animal House.
Yep. He was in Captain Stern, which was, I think he's the prosecutor during the trial.
Yeah, it's a very recognizable voice, isn't it? Yeah,
it's one where, like, those are the ones where I heard it and I was like, yep, that's that guy. Like, it immediately stuck with me. And then Harold Ramis, I think, being in the same, the So Beautiful and So Dangerous short, where they're, doing their drugs on their spaceship while the robot mouse thingy is sleeping with the woman in the other room.
Yeah,
like
John Candy robot mouse.
Yeah, so we get a lot of, like, that's probably the weirdest short, I think, is that.
For a whole movie, that's weird. That is kind of weird.
It's the one that kind of stops you a bit more. And you're like,
they're on the drug-fueled pilots that need to follow the tracks of drugs, right? Yeah. So like we said, overlaps of time. So you get your future, you get your out of the world, and then you get they go back in time to World War II.
Yeah, the B-17 one is
like
interesting.
The zombie kind of
because they used it. They filmed it too on a like 1/10 scale, I believe. B-17.
Yeah,
you can see like the rotoscope element of what they're doing in that shot, but it's basically zombies on a plane.
Right. Yeah.
And it worked pretty well. What I really like about this film is that for me personally, I can't speak for everybody, but this is a rare anthology where I don't think there's a misfire. There are ones I enjoy more than others, but I don't think there's a flat out like unlikable, because there's always in anthologies, there's always that one short when you get up and get popcorn because it's like, I don't like this one as much. I think even all the VHS movies have at least one where I love the first two of the VHS movies, but they all have at least one part of that anthology where it's like, I'll go grab some popcorn and candy now. I can.
Other than the green ball cornering the girl in the corner so she's frightened, which is really weird.
It's weird to me, but because it's an
stand in the corner while you give exposition.
Yeah. But that's the framing device. I'm not going to fault the framing device.
I know, but you have to do an anthology. Right, you have to do an anthology. You have to have some connection. I'm just saying, when you see that's time to get popcorn. For me, it just feels like a complete, not really what heavy metal was. And I understand the guidelines that they can't really do what they did in the comic books. They can't really explain. But the flavor of the heavy metal magazine is just not really in the movie. If you think you're going to see the magazine come to life on film, you're not really going to get that. You're just going to get kind of tight-knit, really animation skits. Yeah. Kind of fits into their niche.
Yeah, having read some of heavy metal years later and being able to kind of get myself in, I can see what you're saying, where they exist as relatives, but maybe not, like a soul translation. And it's kind of a question of like, we got Ivan Reitman producing it, we've got all these comedy actors being kind of in it, but it's also done with a fairly like respect to the material. Yeah. Even if they can't go there with it, Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, even though the heavy metal always had that tongue-in-cheek that, girls can't really keep their clothes on in outer space and sci-fi films. But and also keep the little fun and flavor. And I swear to God, the beginning of this, the car in outer space, is why MTV used the astronaut, because this preludes MTV. And, you have a rock and roll heavy metal animation film, and what you do is you just go out of that stratosphere in the beginning of the movie.
It's a good opening for the credits, like to have this like space shuttle just open up and there's a Corvette inside and it just flies down to Earth, and then it's just never mentioned again. The astronaut gets out and he's the girl's father and he comes home with this green thing and movie's on. Like it's kind of just that's the dreamlike quality that I really dig about the movie, though, is it feels like a rock opera where like not everything is put in your face, explained, and sometimes a Corvette is just a Corvette in a spaceship.
I would have to say one of the main criticisms of it is this a very underwhelming third act.
You don't like Tarna?
It's just really slow.
It is slow. I think maybe
you want to build up. You're going to, and you want something like fireworks. You want a big payoff at the end, even though a lot of these stories are taking their time. You want something to just big explosions, big something, and you're just not going to get that. You're going to get a one-on-one showdown.
Yeah, I would say Tarna either needed to be at the beginning or at the end. I think, because it is a longer one, it's like 30 minutes, whereas like some of the ones like B-17 on the plane, maybe like 5. I mean, it's really short. And you can move a couple of these things around. The Captain Stern one is probably about 8 to 10 minutes. Like, there's things you can show.
No, but she has the look, the feel, the whole of what heavy metal was, and it's just not the payoff. It's very underwoman.
Okay.
Even though she kicks ass in the bar.
Yeah,
sure. You know that's gonna happen, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that you wait the whole movie for, Tarna, because of the visual look of the poster. Like, you recognize her and you're like, I can't wait to see that. Like, that's a really cool poster. Yeah. And I can't wait to see this story. And for some people, I can see that being underwhelming. I like the kind of like the slow, drawn out nature of it, but I agree that maybe earlier in the film it belonged, because I think then something else could kind of give you a poppy ending. You know, I almost think B-17 would be an interesting way to end the last story, because something like so quick, so monstrous
beginning or something. Yeah. So even though it's anthology, even though you like how it's framed, I think you're gonna have to sit in with an editor and how which one goes first and which one goes next. It's kind of rearrange the orders a little bit.
A lot of people don't get that about anthologies too. Is that there is it's like putting together a really good mixtape. There is a language between the songs that have to blend, and that's the same thing with an anthology film. Is these stories have to work on their own, but they also have to have this kind of narrative, or I guess emotional narrative, that's fluid throughout. You've seen some of these anthologies where like the producers literally just paid these guys to license their short film, to squeeze a bunch of short films into a feature and try to make some money off them. And you can tell that doesn't work very well, because you kind of just blend in and out. I'd say the only one that really surprised me was like Scare Package, that was on Shudder, was one that I saw recently, where like I felt all of those were by different filmmakers, but they all understood the assignment. Whereas, like, you know,
that's what you need, right?
It's a different kind of element. Like, there was one Minutes to Midnight that's an anthology of horror shorts where they paid off all these guys for their short films, and not a single one feels like it blends into the others. And I think that's something that can work here and can't. So
yeah. And also, where's the grenade that the cab driver had? Because he opens the glove compartment, he has it, and then he opens it up again, it's not there.
See, we need that in the sequel. Not Heavy Metal 2000, but we need a real sequel.
So, yeah, it's a huge cult following. I don't know, at the time, it was almost like an underground mention, like, hey, you got this animation film. When I worked at the video store, we didn't put it in the animation category, we put it over in the, like, action. So even though it's animation, we usually cataloged it as action, because we're going to get in trouble with the families if you put in the animation, the cartoon that place.
I remember there was a couple of video stores in my hometown, and one of them did that with heavy metal, where it was inside with the I think it was with the action, something like that, or maybe the drama. It was somewhere that wasn't like that I wouldn't have thought it to be. But then I also think back to when we went to the grocery store that had a video section when I was young, and South Park the movie was in the animated. My mom let me rent it, and the rest is history. I've been ruined. So I can see why that would be the case, you know, because I think in video stores you tend to think animation is kids, animation is families. And I guess if you put heavy metal on something like Disney Plus, you'd probably get some angry parents.
You're going to get a phone call, that's right. Yeah. So, yeah, even though it's animation, it's kind of supposed to be trippy, sci-fi. It doesn't really have the payoff you think it's going to have, even though it does have a cult following. People your generation is probably discovering it, like, wow, they had animation like that back then. But it marketed pretty much for your teenage boys to go to the movie theater and chuckle at cartoon nudity and all that stuff.
I mean, we've talked about a lot of cartoon nudity in our month of animation films. So
for some reason,
what's a little bit more, right? Yeah. But I think like the one area where I feel you could view the film in kind of a sour way for me is that, I mean, it does have that like objectification of women. It does have that viewpoint to it. But that, in some ways, that was a lot of what the magazine had too. You know, I mean, it was kind of like larger than life. Everybody was like the most ripped guy or the most voluptuous female. And I can see that kind of frustrating viewers. Like, if that's something you're not interested in watching, this is probably not the right movie for you. But I also think that's an area where it captures what the magazine had in terms of its eroticism and its nudity, its violence, and its kind of like sour humor at times. Like, those are the things that Heavy Metal Magazine did have. Even if the film doesn't feel like a direct translation, they get those elements pretty much out of there, much in the same way that, again, like I referenced Tales from the Crypt. The Tales from the Crypt TV show and movies got that right from the EC Comics, and it felt like those elements, like the high nudity, the high violence, the high swearing, were all part of the Tales from the Crypt in the same way that heavy metal is.
I'm going to go really branch out, and I know there's a remake out there that's kind of really, really underwhelming.
Is that 2000?
Yeah. But I'm going to say this. I would like to have at least a third try at this for heavy metal.
Well, There was kind of a third try.
Yeah.
And it's something I wanted to bring up, actually, so I'm glad you mentioned it. But so I saw Heavy Metal 2000, and I think it's one story, if I remember correctly.
It is.
And that's its problem, is that it's a 90-minute one story that story isn't good. It's an anthology with one story that isn't good.
Do you think if you sit down with a writer's room, if you have, okay, we're going to do one story,
you got to make that one work.
Yeah.
And it felt like it could have been a sequel to Tarna, and then they just kind of went off and did their own thing. And the only thing I liked about it was I think Billy Idol's in it. But there was a third attempt, was that David Fincher tried for years to get, he called it a remake, but it was going to have different stories, so it's kind of a sequel, where he had tried to work with Guillermo del Toro, Zack Snyder. He tried to get all these different filmmakers to come in and do a piece of it, and then he would spearhead the project and put it together. And constantly that film would fall apart, come back together, fall apart, come back together, and eventually got completely retooled into the Netflix series Love, Death, and Robots, which is now on its second season. That was originally envisioned as a heavy metal film.
Heavy Metal 3.
So, in a way, we kind of got that with Love, Death, and Robots, although those shorts are very drastically different.
Right, yeah. But I think if you want, we got that product out.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you have another attempt, and I like what you just mentioned, David Fincher rounding up Del Toro and all to do animation and go back old school, not so much computer heavy, but go back the old fashioned way. Even though it takes a long time to develop, but I think there's a market for people.
I think it's cheaper too. If you take your time, I think you can do it for cheaper.
Yeah, you just have to, like we said, you have to have better writers.
Yeah. When I think something like a Heavy Metal 3 would do well on a Shudder. I know it's not straight horror, but it's got that kind of dark fantasy to it that I think it could turn some heads. I mean, that's what things like The Last Drive-In made huge on Shudder. Yeah. I think Heavy Metal 3 could do that, or another film kind of.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's the component that is missing throughout the movie that it's emphasized a lot in the Heavy Metal magazine, the comic books, is the horror. You get a lot of almost Hellraiser, almost content that you get in the magazine that they don't really have. They're trying to do the tongue-in-cheek fun, comedy bit, but I think if you brought a little bit like Tales of the Crypt kind of stuff,
because the B-17 portion, the zombies on the plane, is 5 minutes of horror, and then it's kind of the only part of it that's really there's some disturbing element to it. Maybe I would say the framing device, the Grimaldi part, where this astronaut shows back up and he brings in the Lochnar and it consumes him alive, and that part is horrific. But again, it's a framing device. It really isn't a story at all. It's kind of just let me tell you my stories,
Yeah.
And I think,
the
we're missing out on some of that horror stuff when we kind of get drudged down, and maybe it's having people like an Ivan Reitman and a bunch of comedic voice talents coming in to voice these characters, as you lose a little bit of that horror. So I agree with you in that way.
Yeah.
It is missing the horror element. Although I would say the Lochnar itself, I get the weird feeling the Lochnar is what's in the trunk in Repo Man. I know that they're not really related, but I like the idea of this Lochnar that shows up in every single
the green bouncing ball, right?
Yeah. And it reminds me, actually, I can't believe I'm doing it. I'm going back to Tales from the Crypt, but in the Tales from the Crypt movies, Demon Knight and Bordello of Blood, there was a key that was filled with the blood of Jesus that shows up in both films and serves a different purpose. It's 2 separate keys, and the idea was that they were going to make 3 movies, and that key was going to appear in all 3. There were going to be 3 separate keys. And that would have been kind of like the Lochnar, if you will. It's those 3 keys that would have been in all 3 films, and that they said that kind of in the third one there might have been a chance to combine the stories a little bit, cinematic universe style, if you wanted. But I like that you've got this kind of evil being that permeates through all of time.
Like a connection, that's what we talk about. You need a small little thread that connects all of them through a trilogy or something like that.
And I like that it isn't straightforward through time. Like the B-17, I like that it's not the first one. And I like that Harry Canyon isn't the last one. Like that it's not timeline-wise. We jump into the future, we jump into the past, we're all over the place. Because that's kind of the theory that people have with the Hellraiser movies as well, is that Pinhead exists in all time periods.
Right.
So, and he's not linear.
Like Inferno and Hellseeker.
Is that his timeline is not our timeline, and it weaves through each other, and sometimes it jumps backwards through time, and it exists in all time periods. That's kind of the cool thing about the Lochnar. So I like that it isn't as straightforward as a narrative as one might expect.
No, right. You just begin the movie, you just go into the same house as the movie Giant with Rock Hudson, the old fashioned. That looks like that house out in Texas prairie. Yeah. So I think, especially for you guys in your age, I think you should watch it. Just figure out what's the reasons everybody talks about it. And yeah, I think it's still kind of a cult following. I think it's still kind of underground, and that was the intent. It wasn't supposed to be mainstream.
It feels like a rite of passage for fantasy fans.
Yeah.
You know, like I feel like if you're going to get into that R-rated fantasy, you've got to check out heavy metal at some point.
Yeah.
And you may absolutely hate the film. I'm not here to tell you that you'll love this movie. I'm here to tell you that I love this movie.
And I agree. I don't really like the movie. Like I said, it's not lifted from the comic books. There's not a lot of the stuff that you get in the comic book. Comic books are really bomb out there. They're really saturated. And here, this just feels like heavy metal light. It feels like a light beer to me.
So perhaps, tell me if I'm wrong here, but we can extrapolate out to say, if you haven't read heavy metal, you might like this movie more.
Yeah.
It's kind of, again, like this might be a good part, because I hadn't read heavy metal when I saw the movie, and now I went back and read the comics, and I really like both of them, because it does feel like an introductory course, if you will. Like it smashes into every single kind of genre that heavy metal seemed to ever hit on, even horror a little bit. It could have done more, but I mean, it does hit every single genre that heavy metal had with its stories. It has the fantasy, it's got the crime, it's got the zombies, and it's got all these different parts.
It does,
of it, and maybe that's kind of a good jumping off point into what would make a great follow-up film, not 2000.
I spent many months on the old-fashioned message boards of the internet talking about this movie and a lot of people. So I know there's a lot of polarization for this movie. There's a lot of people who really love this movie. There's a lot of people who really hate it. I know there's a lot of hardcore fans that do not like it, but like the magazine. They still subscribe for the magazine for over 30 years and do not like any of the movies. And there's people who like the movies and just kind of half like the magazine. So it's definitely one of those that will fill up your message boards and critiques for many, many times to come, because there's just that polarization.
But I feel there's one thing that can bring us all together, and that is that nobody likes the sequel more than the original.
No.
So we can live with that, right?
No, I think they sent out an apology letter in the magazine after the movie came out.
Yeah, well, I think the magazine is run now by Kevin Eastman, who worked on Ninja Turtles.
He's who invented Teenage Mutant Ninja Nerd. Yeah, he invented them.
So we've got a couple of stories in. So I mean, if you've never read heavy metal, I urge you to check out the movie. And again, I'm telling you this right now, you may hate the movie. I love the movie, but you might hate it. And I think it's a good jumping off point. If you haven't read heavy metal, check out this movie. If you've read heavy metal, this may be a different experience, so maybe check yourself at the door, because it's not going to be the exact heavy metal that you know and love from the comics, but I do think it's worth checking out. At least it gives you a reaction.
Yeah. Have you seen heavy metal? Are you like a fan of the magazines and all that good stuff? Let us know. You can comment down below and reach out to us on social medias, Instagram and Twitter.
And we're only going to talk that sequel if you guys force us to.
Oh, God.
But if you join the Patreon, patreon.com/KyleNickOnFilm, you can tell us what to do.
Yeah.
We are your puppets, and if we have to, we will sit through that sequel for you. Okay?
Yeah.
But until then, like, subscribe, check out the Patreon, share the video, and comment below with your thoughts on the film. And hey, if you happen to love that sequel more, I want to hear from you specifically. So go ahead and comment down below and tell us.
Yeah, go ahead and contradict me.
Exactly.
Go ahead. So, once again, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, where you can find anywhere you find podcasts.
And my name is Kyle Goethe, and you can find my film reviews at goatfilmreviews.com. Over 1,000 credited film reviews. Find out what I love, what I hate, and disagree with me as much as you want. Until next time, this is your one-way ticket to midnight.